If you're like me, you spend lots of time poring over maps, looking at weather data, all in an effort to help predict when and where my best times to hunt will be. It'd be nice if there was a reliable source with all this information in one place. Enter the Spartan Forge app. Unlike some other predictive apps on the market, Spartan Forge was created from military combat intelligence experience tailored for hunters, and stands at the nexus of machine learning and white-tailed deer hunting. No more man-made algorithms. This is a predictive model based on real GPS collared deer data, historical and predictive weather, and the next level of mapping imagery, all at my fingertips. I've been using the iOS app this season, and it has replaced all my other mapping tools. Visit SpartanForge.ai and sign up today, or head to your iOS or Android app store. Use the promo code TRUTH to save some money and download it today. Mobile hunters, if you're interested in upping your mobile game, then head to tetherednation.com and check out their saddle gear. There are a few things you can actually buy that will help you become a better deer hunter or give you the freedom to hunt any tree or any situation. This is the reason why I started saddle hunting in the first place and why I use Tethered's gear. I can honestly say that Tethered's saddle gear has changed how I hunt for the better. Big tree, little tree, from the ground, it doesn't matter. I'm untethered by my gear to hunt the best setup for the situation, instead of hunting for a tree that my gear can use. My current core setup consists of the Phantom saddle, tethered one sticks, and the Predator platform, along with an assortment of their accessories. So if you want to up your mobile game, head over to tetherednation.com. Welcome to the Truth from a Stand Deer Hunting Podcast, brought to you by Spartan Forge. I'm your host, Clint Campbell, and you're listening to episode number 327. Today I'm joined by Travis Glassman to talk about decoying and ground hunting mature bucks in the wide open country. So stay tuned. All right. What is up, everyone? Happy Wednesday to you. Hope you are doing well. Hope you are feeling fine. Dreary weekend, man. I know my buddies up in the north piece got yet more snow. So I was talking to my buddy Tom because I was chomping at the bit to get out to, the north piece to finally do some scouting, and I just can't. I can't catch a break with the weather. It's either raining or snowing or icing or something. So at this rate, it feels like I'm not going to get there till June. But I'm joking, of course, but that's kind of how it feels because they got more weather in that area again this weekend. And I asked my buddy that lives up there if he was out, if he could just kind of take a look and see what the ground cover looked like, so I could make my plans for this weekend to see if I was going to make my way up there. And he went out, and it was a couple inches of snow, which isn't terrible, but he managed to slide on his rear end down the side of a mountainside because basically it was a couple inches of snow on top of several inches of what was snow, then rained, and then frozen, and was nothing but like a sheet of ice essentially. So with that, we are still delayed on that. And then of course here locally this past weekend, it was just rain all day Saturday, which was really the only day I had to get out and do anything. So I tried to use my time a little bit more wisely, got some stuff done around the house, so feeling pretty good about that. So with that, we're going to go ahead and just jump into today's show. Have a super cool show for you guys today. I have on Travis Glassman. Travis is from Kansas. He kind of talks a little bit about where he's from when we kick off the podcast. But I've followed him for a little while, as you guys, that have been listening to this for any length of time know that, the ground hunting bug has kind of bitten me, at least in the right applications, where it makes the most sense, particularly whenever I've been out in the Midwest and the plainsy kind of areas. And so I've really just been over the years, past probably 3 years, talking to people, whether it's on the podcast or even just, outside of the podcast, exchanging text messages, phone calls, whatever the case is, picking people's brains about hunting from the ground and trying to get better at it. Now, the sad truth of the matter is that a lot of it is just trial and error. You try things, you do things, and then you screw it up because you can kind of understand it conceptually, and until you actually have to do it. It usually plays out a little bit different. You make a bunch of mistakes, which I have done, and I've kind of explained all those things to you guys over the past 2 seasons. The previous 2 seasons being out in the plains chasing whitetails. However, Travis is really good at it. He lives and grew up in that area, and he didn't start hunting on the ground. He kind of gravitated toward it as he developed as a hunter, and we kind of talk about that. And he just manages to get it done on really mature animals and even an area that's I would say is probably harder to hunt than even the plainsy kind of areas that I've been, where he has even less kind of ground cover, less trees, basically less of everything, and is knocking down mature animals, whitetails for sure, but antelope, elk, like whatever it is, like he's got that Midas touch and is just getting it done. Beyond that, he's a super good dude and one of my favorite people so far to kind of talk to. In relationship to ground hunting. If that's not enough, he also films it from the ground. So in a style of hunting where you can't get away with anything really, he's also kind of taken a camera out into the woods and managed. I think this past season, for the first time, was able to capture the full shot. The arrow penetration on the whitetail, and everything, self-filming everything from the ground, which. Just kind of blows my mind because I have a hard enough time doing that in a tree with some cover. I can't imagine doing it out in the wide open. So with that, we're going to go ahead and just jump into today's show. As always, I want to thank you all for listening. All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of the Truth from a Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. And today I've got on a fellow that I've been following for a little while. If anyone who's followed this podcast for any length of time knows I've been a little bit infatuated with ground hunting. And so I've been kind of doing a dive. I've talked to my buddy Jared Scheffler in the past. I've talked to Zach Farrenbaugh in the past about this. And then this fellow that I have on today, I was watching some of his videos, and he's just got a killer way of hunting on the ground, decoying, and just getting after it with a high rate of success. And that is none other than Mr. Travis Glassman. What's going on, man?
Oh, not too much. Just enjoying a beautiful Sunday out here in Kansas. We're finally breaking through some of the winter weather. We've been dealing with snow, and I guess I don't remember how many days we've had in the past around that 0-degree temperature, but it seems like this year they're just lingering. So today it's like 65 degrees and fairly calm. Ooh. Which is somewhat unusual for Western Kansas. So enjoying that day for sure. I actually have a baseball practice this afternoon. I'm coaching a 9 and under team for one of my boys, and so we're looking forward to getting outside and doing some baseball stuff this afternoon. So
nice, man. That's awesome. When you said baseball practice, I was thinking maybe you were throwing some heat. Maybe you were in an old man's bat league.
No, I have been known to join some of the men's leagues and co-ed leagues in the past, but right now I just turned 40 a year and a half ago, so I'm getting to the point where I'm starting to transfer that to my kids and not get out there and try to hurt myself anymore. So
yeah, no, I hear you. So my father-in-law played college baseball, and if he was probably a little bit bigger, because he's short in stature, if he was taller, he might have had an opportunity to play professional baseball at some level. Mm-hmm. And he played, I always refer to it as old man wooden bat league. He played that up until he was probably, I'm 44. So he, between my age, your age, he played, till, and was still pitching. I loved playing baseball growing up. The funny thing is my brother-in-law, every time I go back home, this was all through my 30s. He would always have a catcher's mitt around. My father-in-law would. So, every time I'd go back, my brother-in-law would be like, "Hey, let's go out in the yard and throw some heat." He liked to catch, and for whatever reason, I had a pretty decent fastball that I could get some movement on, and I had a nasty curve, but I was only good for about 30 throws. The shoulder just doesn't take it like it used to. But for me, I'm a glutton for punishment still, though. So I'm head deep in jiu-jitsu right now. I actually just got back from the gym. Okay. Yeah. Which is also not great for the shoulders, but as I like to say, it's making me harder to kill every day, which I do like.
Right. Yeah. No, jiu-jitsu is it's gaining popularity, or at least some of the podcasts I listen to, some people are engaging in that. So something I've never tried. My boys, one of my boys is just getting into wrestling, and we weren't really a wrestling family, but we're really enjoying that, and it's something that I'm interested in now. But I played a little bit of college baseball, and I ended up dislocating my right shoulder diving into first on a pickoff play. I ended up kind of skipping my hand over the bag when I dove back in, hit my elbow, shoved my shoulder out, couldn't throw for a year. And as an outfielder with a decent arm at that time, it was devastating. I couldn't move on and do anything else. It was kind of a higher power's way of saying you're done. Let's look at family. And let's think about changing our priorities. So, yeah, it's funny how things work out.
That's right, man. There's always the universe always gives you signals, to pay attention to,
Yeah.
And that's awesome that you have. I wrestled all growing up. That's kind of how my interest in jiu-jitsu started. Was just always growing up. Truth be told, as we're recording this today is the Big Ten finals for wrestling. So I'm meeting a buddy of mine to watch that. So I'm excited. I'll be watching from afar, man, to see how things go. If you ever need any help, man, I'm here to help. If you need any tips on training at home and stuff like that, and things maybe he could do on the side. So.
Right. No, we could use all the help we can get because, again, it's not natural for me to just be a wrestling coach. So I'm always looking for outside influences because, it's not me. That's for sure.
Right. Awesome. Well, we can certainly talk about that after the podcast. But, man, I know you started to allude to it just a little bit before we started talking, sports and stuff like that. But if you don't mind, just kind of give a little bit of background about yourself, where you're from, what you do for a living, just so kind of people have a frame of reference.
Sure. Yeah. I was born and raised in Northwest Kansas, and I've basically lived here all my life with the exception of about a year where I lived in Eastern Kansas going to school after high school. Then I ended up transferring back out to Western Kansas to a junior college, played baseball, and that's when the story happened with the shoulder and everything. And ended up after 2 years of baseball, if anyone in college sports knows that it's a full-time job and you don't really get anything else done. In fact, I didn't even have time to make any money for myself when I was playing baseball. So I was so tired of leaning on my parents for money, I decided to start going to work after 2 years of college and basically just started, like anybody at the bottom. And I started working for a natural gas pipeline company as just an operator, doing maintenance on some of the pipelines and stuff like that. And have slowly started working my way up, and I'm now in leadership, and I've been in a leadership role for about 6 years now, and I enjoy that. I have a great crew, great team. We're all the families around us. My wife and I were both born and raised in the area, so we have grandparents close, and the kids are heavy in activities. I have kids that are 4, 8, and 11, and so I got two older boys and a younger daughter, and we're just crazy times right now as a dad, and doing coaching and still trying to get hunting in. And so my passion is hunting and filming the hunts and just doing sharing everything with friends and family. Basically, that's how it all started as far as the filming goes. But still just doing that as a hobby. I love every second of it, whether it's turkeys or deer or going out west for an elk hunt or antelope or anything like that. So that's kind of my background. Just been in the area, haven't really left, and been working for this current company for about 17 years now. So married, like I said, a local lady who's the best lady I know. Kendra is her name. In fact, if you look at some of my videos, she's starring on a couple of those. So she's also a bow hunter. So just loving the outdoors with her and now the kids. And so, that's kind of my background.
Awesome, man. So I'm always interested, because my wife appreciates hunting. She grew up in a hunting family, so she's always been around it. She has no interest in hunting. Even it's the cold weather to be honest. She doesn't like to be cold.
Oh yeah.
So that's the break point for her. Yeah. But how do you? I'm always interested when couples hunt, because I'm always kind of interested in how you kind of divide and conquer that. Like who gets the primo spot, like who gets to go out when the good front hits and things like that. How do you manage that?
Well, that has changed over time. So it used to be, obviously, before kids, her and I would go out and I would basically guide and help her try to get her deer. And she has slowed way down on the hunting just because when I am out, obviously she has to be home with the kids. Luckily, we do have some grandparents that are close. And so sometimes we're able to drop the kids off and just her and I go out for the day. And that has all changed over time, because it used to be, we did do a lot of tree stand hunting and ground blind hunting, and I would prepare in advance and get everything set up to where, I would either drop her off at a stand or a blind, or most of the time I would join her and try to film. And like I said, now it's just changed so much that when we do get a day out, we are thinking, okay, how can we be most efficient? And we go out and we'll start at a good glassing spot, and first thing in the morning as the sun's coming up, and we'll try to locate something and basically just try to cover a lot of ground, either with our glass or by driving roads, if in areas where we know, and then trying to find a target buck, something decently mature, and get him bedded down and just spend the day trying to work in on him and use decoys most of the time, but we'll get into that. And so it's just a different, I guess we're trying to find the most efficient way because we don't have a ton of time together for sure. So,
right.
So that's kind of made my strategy change a little bit over the years. We don't, it was in the beginning, her and I, before we had kids, we were just looking for time to spend together out in the outdoors, and it was, had all the time in the world. We could leave after work and go scouting, and then on the weekends we had all weekend, and we would just sit. And now we look to getting it done pretty quick. So
right.
Anyway, that's how that goes with her and I anyway. So
right. So I know you. So kind of two questions. I guess I'll ask the shorter question first, and then the longer question second. So, how did you get into the filming aspect of things? Because I mean your videos are great. Like I was actually watching some this morning before I went to jiu-jitsu class, and you just do not to kind of bury the lead. I know we're going to talk about ground hunting a lot here through the the remainder of the podcast, but like I struggle with it even whenever I'm in a tree. I try to force myself to do it because I do love the footage. If nothing else, I like to look back when I have an encounter and kind of watch what the deer did, even if it's not one I wanted to shoot. I just like to watch the behavior because I think you can pick a lot of stuff up that maybe you get so caught up in the moment of the hunt that you don't pay attention to maybe the nuanced detail, especially if it's a quick encounter, right? I've tried to film once or twice from the ground, and it was those two times where I was like, "Yep, this ain't happening." Like I was like, "The camera's going to stay in the truck; it's not coming with me if I think I'm going to be on the ground." So, how did you get into filming, especially from the ground?
Yeah, I think I've always had that passion to share. Obviously, the main driver is you can always go home and tell your friends and family how awesome something was, or you want to prove that you were successful and you did it the right way or whatever it is. There's several aspects that I love about filming. Number one is just sharing it with friends and family. Number two is, when you're successful, quite often, and I'm not bragging at all, people tend to think, oh, well, is he doing it the right way, or what's going on with that, And so I absolutely love documenting everything so that everyone sees exactly how it all went down. That's probably one of my, one of the things that really drives me most is just, I want to document everything just because I love what I do. I want to tell the story, and I also want to show people like, this can happen. You can be successful quite a bit, and it's all on film. So there you go.
Yeah, so. Nice. Now you do a really good job. Like I really enjoy just like the perspective that you show, and it's just if you've hunted from the ground and you're like I have been recently, and it's a newer skill for me that I'm acquiring, it just gives a deeper appreciation for how challenging it is what you're doing because. Everything is amplified on the ground. The one part I like whenever I do film something is like we'll have friends over that maybe aren't hunters. Maybe we're having like a little dinner gathering or something like that, and they'll ask me how my season was, and I'll talk to them about it. And if I filmed anything, I'll throw it up on the screen on the the TV in the basement while we're hanging out downstairs and kind of show them, and they'll see like how close I'm getting. They're like, "How close is that?" And I'll be like, "Oh, that was like 10 yards." They're like, "You get that close?" And it just gives them a different perspective. Because they think of, especially in Pennsylvania, they think of hunting as like gun hunting, and there's like a little bit of a negative there can be a negative connotation to that to a degree, culturally, however you want to cut it, like there just is in certain circles, and so when they see how close I get, all of a sudden like they have a different appreciation for hunting because I didn't shoot it from 200. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but for them, the fact that I got closer and I was doing it with a bow, they're like, oh, like you really had to like plan this out. Like this wasn't just like you happened along and ran into something. You know what I mean? And so sure. I like that aspect of it for sure.
Right. Absolutely. And to kind of back up and answer your question a little bit better. So, starting from the beginning when I just wanted to share the hunt with friends and family, it got to be an addiction and a passion, almost as much for getting a successful hunt on film as it was to shoot a specific animal or whatever. So like, I feel like I wasn't successful unless it was all documented. And I don't celebrate as a 100% win unless I feel like I'm able to lay down all the footage to tell the story of how it all happened and to get the shot on film. And I mean, there's so many things that goes into it. It obviously, to what you alluded to, it brings a whole new challenge. And so I started off with just, a fairly cheap camera, and then I started upgrading camera gear. And then I was involved with another show or film crew for a short period of time. And I learned a lot from those guys. Basically it went from me just turning on the camera when the deer was coming in and shooting it to, okay, now let's think about, let's take some nice scenic shots to tell the story about where we're hunting. Let's maybe have some interviews, and let's show some reactions and some different camera angles, and all of those little things that you don't realize are a thing before you start getting into it. Those become very important. And my wife gets very frustrated because I'm constantly stopping to take a panoramic shot, or I'm constantly putting a camera in her face, or stopping to tell the camera a story, or to catch people up on where we're at. We started this morning and now we're, crawling, and now this deer ended up blowing out of here. So we got to, go back to the glassing spot or whatever. So there's just so many things that go into it that people don't understand. And that's what I've become addicted to, is just telling that story. And I feel like I've evolved. If you watch some of my earlier videos, it's just simply turn on the camera and here's a kill shot. And then, I was successful. So,
right.
It's become an addiction, and I absolutely love the film side. So
nice. Awesome. Well, I always look forward to whenever you drop new ones, because one, I know it's going to be an interesting and cool hunt, and it's going to be from the ground most likely.
Right.
Yes. So there's a little bit of selfishness there on my part. But before we start to dive into things, man, how did you start hunting? Did you grow up in like a hunting family? Was it just like PA, heavy hunting heritage state? So it's almost a birthright. You turn 12. I mean, you're in the woods before that with your dad, your granddad, like whatever it is.
Right.
But when you're 12, that's, at least whenever I was growing up, I think they can do it a little earlier now with some like youth stuff. But when I was growing up, it was that 12th birthday, man. Every kid that I went to school with, like, you just had that targeted. It was like a 16th birthday for a driver's license back then. It was like, I turned 12. I get to go to hunting camp. I get to go hunt with my dad, my uncles, and all that stuff. So it was just a natural thing for me. So I'm just curious if it was, a similar thing for you.
Yeah, so I have two kind of hunting influences in my life. One is my Uncle Jerry, and he started, and I don't even know what got him into hunting necessarily, but he kind of got my dad into it, and then my dad started taking us boys. I have a brother and then a younger sister, but my brother and I primarily started hunting together when my dad started taking us, and then we went with Uncle Jerry a lot. Anyway, we started rifle hunting. No one ever really taught us bow hunting. So my Uncle Jerry did a lot of rifle hunting for deer. And so we kind of went along. I shot my first deer with like a 30-30 lever action at 10 years old, rifle hunting. So that's kind of where it all started. And, as most people understand, as soon as you experience an encounter with an animal out, in the wilderness, you either are addicted or not. Well, I was like 100% all in. And from that point, I was, every chance I got, I would always jump in with somebody, whoever was going. So basically 10 years old, I was going younger, just to kind of go with my dad and watch him shoot something or whatever. But that's how it all began, is, someone in the family just willing to take us along. And then my second influence is a buddy's father named Marvin, and he started out, he got me my first bow. So his boy Daniel was my best friend in high school, and Daniel was ready to move to a different bow. Well, Marvin knew that I had never bow hunted, and he asked me if I'd be interested, and so he kind of gave me Daniel's old bow, and I started shooting, and that was probably 14, 15 years old, and so I would jump in with Marvin and Daniel, and we would go to some public land here in Kansas, and we would jump up an old rickety tree stand back in the day, and I just remember sitting and watching animals for the first time. A lot of times rifle hunting in wide open spaces, you're spending a lot of time in a vehicle driving around and glassing, and maybe getting out and making a move on something. But this was the first time I had actually sat in a tree stand and witnessed up close and personal deer movement. And that's what got me hooked on bow hunting is just those up close and personal encounters. And, I just absolutely love nature. It's just the best stress reliever for me is just to be out there and just enjoying everything at slow pace. So,
oh man, yeah.
That's where it all began. Is I started bow hunting as soon as I picked up that bow, and then as soon as my buddy Daniel and I got old enough to drive, we were just, we wouldn't go out for basketball in high school just because that was bow season, and we would at 3:30. We would have hour and a half, 2 hours to run out and jump in a tree or whatever until dark, and we were doing that almost daily. So
right,
I owe Marvin, probably a lot of gas money because we burned up. He kept filling that old Dodge truck up with gas, for Daniel and I to get out of school and haul Bud out to the tree stand. So yeah.
Right, that's awesome, man. And I know I was watching the one video. Your brother was with you, and it sounded like at least that you guys kind of really grew up together, bow hunting, helping each other out and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And the truck comment you just made. Said that you guys kind of, I don't remember if you said you pulled your money together or something, but you ended up with like an S10 because it got good gas mileage.
Yeah. So about that same time when I started bow hunting, my brother and I, we started kind of doing our own thing, because Daniel and his dad were kind of doing their own thing. And so my brother and I, we got our money together and we got this little tiny S10 pickup, and that's what allowed us to kind of get out to the tree stand together. And so, we started out, not a lot of money growing up, but, and of course our first vehicles were, whatever we could afford, and so anyway, we were able to work together, get out the tree stand one way or another. So, yeah,
there's something to be said about those, I think, a lot of people go through these types of things in anything where, especially if you're young, you start off with, very little means, and that is the mother of invention, right? There's something you want to do. You just figure out with what I got, how do I do the thing I want to do with what I got, Yep.
It's life lessons, I think everyone needs to struggle once in a while to be able to put into perspective, right now my kids are way more spoiled than I was growing up. Just my wife and I are fortunate enough to make good livings, and they're probably not struggling like we did. So it's something, man. I mean, it's funny you say that because my wife and I've had that same I have a daughter, she's 14, and she's an only child. We're not going to have any more kids, and we didn't have a lot growing up, and certainly my wife and I are better off than our parents were, and she doesn't really, especially being an only child, she doesn't really want for anything. If it's something she wants to do or an experience she wants to have, we can figure out a way to, make sure she does that. And so we've talked about, so she does jujitsu as well. And I put her in jujitsu, and I was like, this is my payment. Cause she does equestrian riding classes and other stuff that she's into. And I was like, I need to manufacture hardship for her because I had it growing up. We had it growing up just because we didn't have a lot, but I also I wrestled, and that was hard and it was challenging. Someone physically imposing themselves on me was difficult day in and day out. And I was like, I just want to manufacture challenge for her so she understands what it's like to struggle in some capacity, Absolutely.
And then learns to fail and learns to take that failure and learn something from it and build from it and progressively get better and stack blocks on top of, a good day on top of another good day on top of another good day. And ultimately that's how you're going to reach your goal. It doesn't just show up, Right. And so, you hit the nail on the head with that, man. I think it's important. And I think, I think there's a lot of lessons in bow hunting that kind of teach you that too, if you let it. Some people that just look at it as I'm going to go out and just try to kill something. Man, you're missing the picture. It's because there's so much value beyond the release of an arrow, whether you're in a stand or on the ground, that you can take that'll enrich your life.
Yeah. Speaking on that, we all, if you bow hunt, you're going to experience heartbreak. And it was such an obsession to me at one point in time that, everything in this world revolved around bow hunting. And if I didn't get the animal, if I failed, it was the end of the world. And, as I've gotten older and understood, family and life and different perspectives, you change your perspective, obviously, but yeah, it's witnessing hardship or disappointment. We fail as parents if we don't teach our kids that every day is not just going to be rainbows and butterflies, so.
Yeah, exactly. Speaking of maybe not having hardships, man, it looked like you had a pretty good season this year so far, or at least not so far, but in 2022.
Yeah, 2022 was good. I still haven't got my turkey video out. It was not as long as I normally would like, but Kendra's video is up, her turkey video, so we got her a turkey. We were not able to get my oldest son a turkey, unfortunately. We had a lot of close encounters, but just didn't quite get it done with him. I finally filled my tag, and so that hunt is still in editing right now, as we are almost to April again. And then, so starting with antelope, we started out hunting some antelope out here in Kansas, and I was able to make a really good stalk and a really good shot. My buddy Jared was filming over my shoulder, and that's kind of something I didn't touch on earlier, is all this filming heavily depends on a quality person who's willing to be alongside you, whether it's me filming someone else or a buddy or my wife or whatever, willing to spend the time over your shoulder. So it's a double commitment. So when you say it's so difficult to film on the ground, I finally this year was able to document a hunt on film by myself, filming myself on the ground. Still didn't get the shot on film, but it was close. And so I think if you was it
a mule deer? I think I watched that one today.
Yeah, it was the story of Loppy is his name.
Loppy, that's it. Yeah.
He had kind of a lopsided looking rack, and we had some history with him. But anyway, he had stepped out of the frame right when I was getting ready to shoot, and then I grabbed the camera and kind of watched him go down. But anyway, it's just amazing how hard it is to do what we do, try to get it all on film on the ground especially. But anyway, back to the season. So the antelope success was awesome. My buddy Jared was filming me. That was actually my first antelope with a bow. I've shot some with a rifle. As a resident, there's not a lot of antelope numbers in Kansas, and so it's like every 7 years we can draw a tag with a rifle.
Oh wow! Okay.
But then archery hunting, we can get a tag every year. However, it kind of overlaps with deer season. So our deer season starts kind of toward the second half of September. And basically it starts with muzzleloader season, but you can also bow hunt. But you have to wear orange during those couple weeks of muzzleloader season, which is what I ended up doing this year. And then kind of about the same time, we do some archery antelope as well if we choose. And a lot of time I just haven't chosen to spend the time out needed to shoot one. Well, it's extremely difficult for one, and two, I just don't have a lot of time to dedicate. If you kind of research and kind of listen to some of the antelope hunters, the success rate obviously is like 10% or less. I mean, it's just very difficult to get close enough with an antelope with a bow. Anyway, everything was right this year. The conditions were right. There was some wind in our favor. There was we had a really bad drought this year, and some of the corn failed. So it was like half as high as it normally is. So it was just like basically falling over on itself, and they didn't even pick some of it. So anyway, the antelope would feel more comfortable. Normally they don't like getting close to a cornfield edge because they don't know, they know danger is near. I mean, there could be a coyote, sitting right on the edge of the cornfield, which they could, close the distance pretty quick. Anyway, for whatever reason, this buck had a doe pinned down. It was in the middle of rut, and he was somewhat close to a corn edge, but again, you could kind of see through the corn because it was so bad. I mean, just really dried up and shriveled. And so we were able to use what little cover we had and crawl along that corn edge and get within bow range. And he was just kind of standing quartering away. And if you watch the video, you'll see just tucked a beautiful arrow right behind that last rib up, quartering away. And it just unbelievable shot. So, just a fun hunt. And a good shot, you go through all the motions and you envision the shots, and a lot of times they don't go where you hope they do, but that one did. So it was a lot of fun.
Nice.
Then transitioning to the deer, like I said, whether I ended up shooting a deer before, I think I might have shot the deer before. Anyway, that story of Loppy, the whitetail, he was like a upper 170s whitetail and just an awesome deer. We had been, earbud fell out. We had been basically following that deer for, we've had trail photos of him since he was like 4 years old, and we kind of estimated him this year at probably 7.5, I think.
Yeah. Wow.
And so he had been eluding us, and turns out he was a buck that had been bedding within like 200 yards of a main gravel county road. Now it was a deep drainage and a lot of vegetation and plenty of cover, but I kept getting pictures. I had permission across the road from where I ended up shooting him, but I had never asked for permission on this specific piece that I shot him at this year. And he ended up being on that piece, and I feel like now that I kind of put all the puzzle pieces together, I feel like he was under my nose right there, bedded in those summer months near that road for a lot, pretty much his life.
Right.
Anyway, got trail photos of him across the road on the piece that I was always able to hunt. And I was like, man, he's getting here, but he's only getting here like, he's still at dark after, in the afternoon. So I knew he was close, but I didn't know how close, and I didn't know why he was showing up and where he was showing up. But anyways, kind of took a step back and, put some cameras at a couple different spots. And what I think really helped me out this year was, again, the drought. Water was at a minimum, and I was able to find a natural spring, and it was on that new piece of property across the road. And I was able to hang some cameras over there and figured out, he was coming in once in a while to water before dark. And so I ended up setting up over on him, and basically with the mindset, okay, he's going to use the wind to sit check that water, and I want to be downwind of that. And I ended up being about 100 yards downwind of the water hole, and sure enough, one evening it all came together, and he came in like 50 yards downwind of that water, looking down at the water, which was looking away from me. Perfect situation, was able to come to full draw, move the camera on my own tripod, sitting in kind of a little natural blind I made, and delivered a 45-yard arrow, and the rest is history there. But anyway, after that, ended up having some success with my little brother. I'm still editing that film, or no, actually his is up, and then I was editing my buddy Jared's whitetail film. It should be coming up here pretty quick. But anyway, you haven't seen everything that we were successful with. I thought this year, being a drought year, was going to be very slow and almost disappointing. The antelope came together, my deer came together, and then little brother got a nice mule deer, which is on one of my videos, and then my buddy Jared shot a really nice whitetail kind of toward the end of November, almost Thanksgiving time. And just a really awesome mature buck that was also a ground hunt you're going to enjoy. So I was
Awesome.
filming there, and he delivered an awesome arrow. It was an amazing shot there too. So anyway, that one's still being edited right now. So anyway, that was kind of my season. Good antelope
Heck
hunt.
of a year, man.
Yes, for sure.
Heck of a year. Man, I'm curious. You mentioned earlier that you started off tree stand hunting. So I'm curious, like, when you made the transition to like ground hunting, and what was it that made you want to make that change? Because I feel like everyone has like a seminal moment, like if they do want to start to ground hunt, that's like, and there's a hunt this year that I was that I had that, like, after I was listening to like some of your videos or watching some of your videos, like you mentioned something in one of them that made me think back to that hunt, to where it's like I underplayed my hand, I guess I should say, because I started off in a tree, and I'll tell you what happened here as we go. But I'm just curious, like, what made you want to make that change where you were like, all right, that's it, I'm getting out of a tree and I'm just going to be on the ground? Well,
I think looking back, a lot of the tree stand encounters that I had, especially, even in the middle of the rut, I noticed that the deer that I had an opportunity at 10, 15 years ago when I was tree stand hunting were good deer, but they weren't the alpha bucks. They weren't the big, mature, take no crap off anybody bucks. They were like the 3-year-olds that were cruising, that maybe got kicked off of a doe because a more mature buck kicked him off, and now he's out looking again, or something like that. Well, then I had kind of a light bulb moment when a buddy took me out. It was around Thanksgiving time, and this was a mule deer hunt, and he had a mule deer doe decoy at the time. And he took me along and he said, I've spotted this buck and I think we can get him decoyed in. And I had never messed with the decoys at all at that time. And turns out there was 2 mule deer bucks by themselves after the rut, no does in sight. And he showed me to take a doe decoy, and obviously a buck's testosterone is still at a high level at Thanksgiving. I mean, they're still wanting to rut, wanting to breed. So he showed this decoy at like 150 yards, and it took a while. The bucks laid there, and they got up and stretched, and he kind of flashed that decoy around. And sooner or later, they just start single file coming right in. And he's like, "Hey, you getting ready?" I was behind him, and
right.
and he had this decoy up, and I'm like, okay. So I shot the biggest of the 2 at 5 yards over his shoulder, which obviously it takes some trust in a bow hunter and a partner to understand how to operate a bow around a partner. But that was my light bulb moment where I was like, this is a very efficient way of doing this. We're taking advantage of a buck's testosterone level, his wanting to breed. And then I started doing that and kind of, I started talking to the owner of Heads Up Decoy at that time. And I've become very close friends with Garrett with Heads Up Decoy. And we started talking strategy. And he and I have worked together over these last 10 years to kind of really hone in the best way to approach this. And the whitetails are a different animal. A mule deer is a herd animal. And I feel like if you show a doe decoy, it's less intrusive. And anytime a mule deer sees a lone doe, they feel like I need to have that doe in my herd. And so they're going to, at some point in time, it may be an hour, it may be 2 hours, they're going to get up and they're going to try to go round you up or scent check you to bring you into their herd. Well, a whitetail, you're taking advantage of his more aggressive behavior, where we switched to a buck decoy at that time. So anytime my best scenario that I strive for is, let's find a whitetail buck. Let's find him pinned down with a doe during lockdown. A lot of people hate hunting lockdown because deer don't move. I'm looking for ways to find those bucks with those does during lockdown. So I'm really glassing on vantage points, and maybe out here we have the luxury of having some more open territory, so we're able to put some eyes on them. But I always think to myself, if I was in a tree stand and if there was 5 acres of CRP and I could see a buck pinned down with a doe out in the middle of that CRP, I'm getting down and I'm grabbing a decoy and I'm going to go make something happen, rather than sit there and just hope like heck he decides to push his doe your way. So that's the difference for me. But anyway, that's how that all kind of started with the ground thing. I realized there was a whole nother world out there. A whole nother, I mean, you could be in the action daily. In a tree stand, you may not see a deer. Even if I mess it up on the ground, I'm in the action. I had a heck of a hunt, and now I've got a camera to film it, and I can go tell my buddies, like, I almost got it done, or he knew something wasn't right, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so that's what I like. That was a turning point for me. Not saying I don't sit in a tree or a ground blind anymore, because there's times where, just like this September, that I ended up getting my buck that way. So
right.
Anyway.
Yeah, it's more of having that tool in your toolbox, and that if I need to get into a tree, if that's the best way to kill this deer, it's just using the right kind of strategy for whatever that deer or that situation's calling for. But I'm glad you mentioned about getting down, because so this is what happened to me this year. And after watching, I think it was in one of the videos you had mentioned this, or you just mentioned it just now as well. There was one deer that was local to me that I was willing to kill. Like, I didn't have a whole lot of great inventory for this year. I had some good bucks that were kind of like 2 hours north of me, but it's a piece I'm not super familiar with. So I'm still kind of learning. It's mountain ground. It's huge acreage and just big mountains. But local to me, I had one deer that I knew of. Got a picture of him late in the fall, like I think it was like September 27th. And there's a specific date in this particular area around a community scrape that turns on every year. Like, I've watched it for multiple years. It's like October 18th-ish. It'll ebb and flow like a day on the it might be the 17th or it might be the 19th, but it's like in that 17th, 18th, 19th is like the day it's going to pop off. And that's usually the first time I'll see the most mature deer in that particular area will make a mistake and show himself at that community scrape, like usually that day. And so in 2021, I had an encounter there and I screwed that one up. Just like I couldn't tell what deer it was. He came in and it was too late for me to draw. I didn't have any cover. This year I was in the same tree and the one deer that I was willing to kill, shows up at, I think it was 10 o'clock. He bedded 40 yards from me downwind of that scrape and was scent checking it. Now, I sat in that tree and watched him and glassed him for like 2 hours at 40 yards, just making sure he was still there. Because he was like through some brush, and the way I saw him was I saw his antlers kind of move. Like I saw the light change as his antlers kind of moved in the brush, and that's how I knew he was in there. Because I didn't watch him come into bed. I just kind of caught his antlers moving as he was laying there moving his head. And I sat there for 2 hours and watched him. He got up. And conventional wisdom would say he's going to walk to that scrape, scent check it, and then go on his merry way. But the wind was the way he was bedded. He was just scent checking it while he was laying there. Mm-hmm. So when he got up, he stood up, he milled around that bed a little bit, and then he just headed direct north of me and walked out of my life, right? And if I had thought about it, the thought crossed my mind, but I was stubborn. I thought about it because as soon as I saw him, I was like, I'm going to wait for him. I don't know when he got here. It's like, so I don't know how long he's been laying there. I was like, but if he stands up once and lays back down, I should get down and I should try to go over and stalk. Because I had enough wind sound cover to like get down and like make a move, And the wind was right to where it's like I had just an off wind, so I could actually go almost toward him and get close. You know what I mean? And he stood up and he laid back down, and I was like, all right, that's my opportunity because he's probably gonna bed for probably like another hour before he stands up and does whatever he's gonna do. And I was like, no, he'll come to this scrape. So I sat in that tree and he walked out of my life. And like you saying this just reminds me painfully of that hunt because I had the opportunity to get down out of the tree and make the move on him. And I had the scenario set up right, had the wind cover, had the wind to my advantage where it was blowing to him, but I was off his wind just enough that I could get close to him without blowing up my scent in his face. And that to me was like the quintessential, like, why ground hunting is so important and how it can be so effective, especially where I live. You know what I mean? Because, when you're in the East and Midwest, like you said, like you don't always have like these glassing vantage points. A buddy of mine in West Virginia, they got these big old, like old strip mines that they like then, put warm seasonal grasses, let them grow up, and they basically turn into like big CRP kind of areas. It would remind you almost the inverse of like Kansas, where everything's like you're up, but you're looking down in like these big valley fields, kind of, where in Kansas it's more of like you're up looking kind of like over flat ground or just like undulating ground or whatever. Right. So you do get some of that in the East, but how it can be effective, I think here, and I think too many people don't consider it an important tool for them in the East is actually watching that observation, especially if you're in and around a bedding area, and watch them bed and then get down and make a move. Would you agree with that? In the East, there's a lot more opportunities and people kind of give credence to ground hunting.
I feel like yes. I mean, always no, but most times or oftentimes, I think people overlook an opportunity just because it's always like, oh, I'm just going to slip in here, and if it works, great. If he comes by, great. If not, I'm going to slip out of here and have some hunts for future. And I understand you always have to weigh your options of, okay, am I running the risk of messing this up? If I push him out of here more than once or something like that, then is he going to be back? Is he going to, be pulled off his normal pattern? And I understand the reservation to get down to do that. If you're running the risk of leaving too much scent or pushing him out or whatever. But especially in November, I would always recommend, if you have an opportunity, take a handheld decoy, sit it at the bottom of your tree, throw a stump on it or whatever, and just keep it there. And if you feel like you have an opportunity to climb down, close the distance, and present a decoy, throw a grunt out there, maybe a snort wheeze, take advantage of his testosterone level. It is going to likely make him do something that is going to be in your favor. Now, in your situation, being middle of October, if you can slip in there, quietly without a decoy or whatever, maybe it's a dominant buck and maybe a decoy will work at that time. Obviously, he's scent checking that scrape because he wants to know who's in the area. Mm-hmm. So he's already, maybe, was he an older deer? I mean, I assume he was one of the older deer.
Yeah. I mean, around here, you're not going to get like 7.5-year-old deer necessarily, because just
Right.
heavy gun pressure and stuff like that. But usually, when I saw his body from the trail camera picture, I was like, he's a 4.5-year-old. So for around here, he's pretty close to mature as you're going to get.
Yeah. So it would be a 50-50 chance at that point in time, whether you present a decoy, and he may react with dominance and say, no, I'm the boss and I'm going to come over here and figure out who's trying to come in here. Or, to your point, if you had some wind and you just wanted to slip over there and try to get within bow range without, making yourself known with the decoy, then yeah, that would have been a great opportunity too. But yeah, I feel like, to answer your question, a lot of times people don't understand the opportunity that's right in front of them, or it never crosses their mind to even try. So yeah, I feel like you can be successful a lot of times if you just take that initiative and try to make something happen.
Yeah, I think for me, it was painful, like looking back on it, because I was literally debating it while I was sitting in the tree. And the bummer was that part of my thinking was kind of what you were suggesting, where I was like, all right, so this deer was close. I know he's in the area. I'm going to wait for the right weather conditions. I'm going to slip back in here and see if I can kill him. I never saw him again. I never got a trail camera picture of him again. Like, it was like he had that one slip up, you know what I mean? And that was it. Yeah. So the worst case scenario was I would have got down, boogered him up, and never saw him again. This scenario was I tried to save the hunt for another hunt and still never saw him again. You know what I mean?
Right.
So
yeah,
it's you're kind of in a 50-50, right? But I think for me, the public that I hunt and stuff like that, it's like I would probably err on the side of being aggressive, because there's a chance he's going to get boogered up by someone else, even if I don't booger him up.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
I was going to say that, and even when I have the luxury of hunting some decent private ground, you just never know what could happen. I mean, I've lost bucks to other hunters. I've lost bucks to disease, cars hitting them, whatever the case may be. And so there's no guarantees that he'll be back tomorrow. And maybe, he'll follow a doe during the rut the next day or whenever it is, and, be on the neighbors, and then he's gone. And so I like to take advantage of any opportunity that's in front of me, because you just never know what the future holds.
Yeah, exactly. It's like there's no time like the present to make it happen, right? Especially you don't want to do something silly that you know is not going to work. But if you have the conditions and things in place that gives you a fair shot to beat that animal, then why not try?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
we are trying to beat them at their game, and if you find that the odds are somewhat in your favor, you better jump on it.
Probably isn't going to get much better.
No.
Right. Nice. So, man, in your mind, because I know you've been, ground hunting for a while, are there principles of hunting from the ground that you kind of, I don't want to say live by, but are there things before anyone decides to kind of jump whole hog into ground hunting? Are there like fundamental things that you, at the very baseline, before I get into decoying, before I do anything else, like it's these fundamental things I need to kind of have at the forefront of my mind to make sure that a hunt even has an opportunity to play out in my favor before I actually get to like the actual, final end game, if you will?
Yeah, a couple things stick out right off the bat. Wind, number one. Know your approach. Number two, stay in the shadows as much as possible. With being, if it's flat land, obviously you don't have a lot of options, but I'm always finding a creek drainage to run, to try to stay, try not to silhouette yourself, basically.
Right.
Keep as low as you can at all times. Try to move as quick as you can. Try to use the wind, not only for keeping your human scent out of the path of any potential deer, but also if it's a calm day, sometimes you'll have some gusty winds come up for 10 minutes. You better be ready to move and move during that time, because you may wait another hour before you get another opportunity to move when the wind comes up again or something. So I have to use every tiny little terrain feature, ungulation, drainage to my advantage at all times. I have to be thinking about when I'm going to make my next move, how I'm going to get there. So just try to map it out ahead of time. Like I said, use the terrain as much as possible, and use the wind noise more than anything to cover up your movements.
Yeah, that was a big kind of learning curve for me in Kansas. And this year I felt like I did it much better than I did the year before. Was just paying, And I do it around here as well, but it became that much more important out there because of the visibility, right? It's like, and the other part too was like, I didn't realize until I got out there how much more, I'll say noise, but you want to be as quiet as possible, but how much quieter they are on the ground and how much more you can get away with because the sound doesn't quite travel the same. It's almost like it's a little bit more muffled on the ground,
right?
Because it's got vegetation that it has to get through, like to either get to you if a deer is moving. So a lot of times it's like I wouldn't hear deer until they were super, super close. Yeah. You know what I mean? And so, and it took me like one season of hunting in Kansas to figure that out to where I went back next year and I was like, oh, I can get away with a little bit more because I have trouble hearing them. They're going to have trouble hearing me. You know what I mean? Yeah. And then if I wait for those gusts and stuff like that, now it's like, now I'm in business. I can really start to, make some moves.
Yeah, a couple great points there. So whenever you hear a deer walking, you're very close because they don't make a whole lot of noise. If you can hear them step on a leaf or a corn stalk or whatever, they're probably within 30 yards, they just don't make a ton of noise. And then you're right. You don't realize how much more noise you're able to get away with. So like they are so used to different things making noise, whether it be a field mouse running around or a squirrel or whatever. I mean, they're used to hearing other things. Now, they are educated enough to know that if they hear the constant walking of a human, of this, they're probably going to perk up and check out what's going on. But if you just pick your times to put your hand down for the next movement of the crawl or whatever, they're probably not going to just, think something's out of the ordinary. So,
right.
Yeah, you can get away with more than you think.
Yeah, with the wind, in terms of scent, are you, when you're working the wind, are you, because I've heard different schools of thought on this. So, when I'm in a tree, I'll just take the tree example to start with. Like I'm always trying to corner the wind or cut the wind, right? It's like where I want to give the deer the wind as much as possible to where it's like I'm almost blowing up my spot, but I'm just off enough to where by the time he smells me, like he's already got an arrow, or I have an opportunity to get a shot off. On the ground for me, it was a little bit different because like I almost have to like have the wind in my face to make sure I'm safe, like not blowing it up before I even get the opportunity.
Yeah.
But then I have to like start to like they're going to be looking in that direction a lot of times, right? And so I have to pick a point at which I have cover to where I can get moved to where I can start to corner the wind, and then it becomes a little bit more dangerous from a wind standpoint. But I have to do that to not give up my visual. Is that like a similar way that you have to play it? Am I even thinking about it correctly? I guess is the first question.
Yeah, I think so. I had I never stopped learning. This year was kind of a big eye opener on that loppy whitetail hunt. So most people would think, okay, I'm going to hunt over this water hole, and I was on the ground, and whether you're thinking of a still hunt or not, I'm not sure in this situation that you're explaining, but it just kind of brought this up to my mind. So I set up like 100, 120 yards from that water hole, and most people would be like, well, there's no way in heck you're going to shoot a deer at that water hole because you're 120 yards away. Well, I'm like, yeah, but I know the route he's wanting to take so that he can scent check that area before he approaches the water, and that's going to put him in my lap. And it's not going to allow him to be downwind of me to smell me before he approaches that water. If I was hunting over that water hole, he would have smelled me and he would have never came in. But because I backed off that 125 yards to allow that buffer for him to be able to have enough room to scent check it, and I was behind him on, kind of just waiting. And I kind of learned that by accident. I didn't design it necessarily. It was the only place that I felt was good for me to set up and not be detected. Right. It was, I didn't really have a great option for an ambush spot. And when that happened, it all came together. I'm like, holy smokes, I've been doing this all wrong. I should have been setting up 150 yards, away from where I normally thought I would kill him, And so just something to think about. I guess, did I answer your question? Because like when I'm spotting and stalking, I'm always just making sure that the only thing I'm really worried about is my sound, and any deer smelling me at all. So like as long as that wind is blowing my noise away from him or my scent, I'm good. I don't really care. There's been times where I've approached a deer, with the wind perfectly in my face. And there's sometimes you can't get that luxury and you have to come in from a side wind. So it all depends on the situation and the terrain features in order, to get to that animal.
Right. You bring up a good point that I was thinking about as I was, thinking about our, getting ready for our conversation today. And that is, you mentioned still hunting and you mentioned ambush, right? And I think a lot of people, when they think of ground hunting, they think of it almost singularly, right? Where it's just like you're on the ground and that is the style, right? But the reality is, I started picking this up just from going out west and elk hunting and stuff like that, but it really kind of crystallized for me on these Kansas trips because I had to try almost all of them at different times for whatever the setup called for or how much I knew of a deer, like because maybe I glassed him before and started understanding what he was wanting to do or whatever. And so, can you talk a little bit about the different types of approaches that there is for actual ground hunting? Because you just mentioned two right there. There was one that was ambush, right? And then there was one that was spot and stalk, right? And so what are the different types or what kind of, approaches do you take to your ground game?
Yeah, so I would say early season for me, and I call that September-ish. There's still a lot of vegetation, leaves are on the trees, grass is still tall. I set a lot of cameras out and I try to figure out, okay, are they coming to water? Are they going to a food source? Are they coming out of a tall standing cornfield and going to water or whatever? And I try to figure out that pattern early. And so that would be my ambush scenario where I'm trying to get as close to that bedding area as possible because we all know when it's hot, deer just don't move much. And you seriously have to be within almost bow range of their bedding area in order to get an opportunity because you may have 10 minutes of daylight that animal's actually on his feet and moving, that he's visible. And that's what happened this year with my September hunt. And so that would be number one for me is I'm always looking for those opportunities for ambush situations. But then once late October to early November starts, I don't really think of ambush hunting anymore unless it's just a blatant, obvious ambush situation where I've seen a deer do something, come out of a bedding area, move to whatever. Maybe he's going to scent check a small pocket of weeds or timber thinking, he's going to scent check this doe bedding area or whatever it is. So I always look for ambush spots during that time. If I know he's going to scent check a doe bedding area, I killed a buck is out of a tree, but it could have been done on the ground a couple of years ago where it was almost the same situation as the waterhole moment that I just told you about. I was sitting far enough away from where I thought he was going to be sit checking that bedding area that it put him right in my lap. So there was 2 points where I was like, okay, I've been playing this wind thing all wrong, and now I got to back up, get away. But then transitioning over to the spot and stock situation, that's really, I'm just looking for enough wind to cover my noise, and scent. You really have to mess up when you're spotting and stalking, and if you just completely don't understand how wind works, you obviously don't want your scent going right to a pocket of deer. So that's really what I focus on is more covering my noise and then just staying enough out of the scent zone to keep my scent away from them.
Right. So when you're approaching for like a spot and stalk, because I think there's different schools of thought on this. So some people want to approach where, the deer doesn't really have a chance to see them. Right. And I've heard, this is something that I've heard, Jared, I think it was from Whitetail Adrenaline. He's talked about a little bit where he actually started liking to approach them actually head on. And part of the reason was that what he started finding, and I'm just curious what your kind of thought, what your experience has been, not that either approach is right or wrong, but what he started finding was whenever I felt like when he moved horizontally across the vision, like you showed a larger profile and they could more easily pick you up because it's just like if you're standing in, there's light and then all of a sudden you do this, it's like the light changes, right? Because you had something kind of go in front of it. Whereas, if you're just like this kind of moving in front of it the whole time, like the depth perception doesn't really change because we know that deer don't see super well, but they see changes in movement. And so if you don't change the the horizon on them and it stays consistent, he felt like it was a little bit more concealing. So I'm just curious what your approach is. People that are watching this video is like, what's this guy doing with his hands?
No, this is exactly what I look for. And I agree 100% with Jared, because there's been a lot of times where, say there's this big side hill and I have to work down to these deer in the bottom. If I just slide on my rear end straight at them and just slide a foot and wait and just keep sliding, they might be looking at us. This happened to us this year, my brother and I. They were looking straight at us, but we were in line and we didn't go left to right at all, horizontal movements. And we just kind of kept slowly sliding down the hill until we got to where we did have some terrain at the bottom to where we could actually move on them. So he's 100% right. As long as you don't do anything abruptly, you can get away with quite a bit. And that was kind of tying into the point that I had earlier, where do not silhouette yourself. Do not horizon yourself. Don't, if you have to hike in the opposite direction a half mile in order to catch the drainage, a quarter mile to the right, so it brings you back to where you can be down in a bottom somewhere, do it. Don't take a chance to jump over a big open flat that's going to horizon you at all, because they will pick your movement up. They are, you're right, they don't see particularly well, but they see movement exceptionally well. So don't be moving out in the middle of nowhere.
Right. Yeah. I got away with a bunch this year on a pretty sizable deer in Kansas. It was on the last day of my hunt, and I glassed him. And people have heard this story on this podcast, so I'll make this short for them, for their sake. But, I crawled up this draw because I watched him earlier in the trip. I knew he was going to lock down. I couldn't pick him up again once he locked down with this doe, and I knew it was going to be a couple of days before he would come back. And if I timed it right, I'd probably get one more crack at him. And so I knew roughly where he wanted to go, because I had watched this one spot the year before as well. So I knew that they like to cut does out into this particular area. And so my plan was to get up that draw and just actually go up the draw or the drainage and use an ambush setup on him. Because I knew I was 85% sure he'd be there if he was off that doe. And so I crawled my way up and I was coming up out of the drainage. Well, just as luck would have it, he was at the tree I was trying to get underneath. Like when I got there, he was already there. And this is dark. I had 20-30 minutes of dark left. Now he was silhouetted, so I could see him, but I was coming up out of the drainage from the bottom, so I had all the dark behind me, and I spent 20 minutes within 20 to 35 yards of this deer for 20 minutes and I had no cover. I was in CRP and a ghillie jacket, and that was it. I wasn't behind a tree, nothing, and I just couldn't get a shot because I couldn't get. There were some saplings that were around, and I knew where the saplings were at, but I couldn't tell. I knew if he broke one certain spot that I knew he'd be in front of the saplings, and I just had a frontal shot, and I just wasn't comfortable with the setup. But it just goes to show, it's I was that close for that long to that deer, and the whole point was because he just could not see exactly where I was at. He heard me. He thought I was another buck. So in order for me to move to try to get behind a small little Charlie Brown tree, I did what you said, which was just sound like I don't have 2 feet. So I started scuffing my feet along the ground and hitting a grunt tube, just making it sound like I was a deer. And he got all fired up and started snort wheezing, carrying on. He was not a happy camper, And right. So so I tried to use all the bits and pieces. I mean, it would have been an epic hunt if I had stuck an arrow in him, because it was just one of the most bananas experiences I've ever had. But just to have a counter was super cool. But just to your point, making sure that you're using, the terrain to your advantage. And if you move almost at them, because I was moving directly at him as I was coming up out of that draw, and he just, he had no clue exactly what I was or where exactly I was.
Yeah, a couple things on that. I was thinking in my mind as you were approaching, and you said he couldn't see you very well, but he could hear you. I was thinking to myself, the first thing that came to my mind was hit the grunt tube, and then you alluded to you did. So I was like, if he can hear you, and he can't see you that well, make him mad, and a lot of times if you just hunker down and maybe hit him with a grunt tube, he might come. But anyway, the next thing is, when you made the point that he couldn't see very well, whenever you're approaching a deer, I always tell myself the best scenario is a north wind, because the wind's in my face and the sun's at my back. So the north side is always going to be, if you're looking north, you're always going to have the sun at your back, unless it just happens to be sun up or sunset. So in the middle of the day, if you're going on a stalk, you have the sun at your back. So when the deer looks up or looks toward the south, they're going to have that sun in their face. So they're not going to be able to pick out you very much. And so when you're approaching, think about that. Look behind you. Try to put yourself in a position that is going to make you see the angle that deer sees. And that'll tell you, yes, I'm lit up here, or no, I'm pretty well in the shade, or whatever the case may be, and you have an advantage there. So yeah, anytime a south wind day is a tough one for me, because the deer has his back to the south and looking north, and so he has the sun in his favor on those days. And so a lot of times I'm finding myself trying to approach from east or west to the sides, because if I come from the north, I'm lit up like a beacon, because that sun is right in my face. So
yeah,
use the sunlight.
That's a great point, man. I never thought of that. That's a great kind of, if nothing else, I mean, the bummer is like, prevailing winds are often southwest, right? It's like, I think in Kansas, if I'm not mistaken. So
that's correct.
The double kind of whammy on that is that if you have that north wind, like you probably have a front along with that. So you got some weather to your advantage, you got the sun to your advantage. And so it just is overall a good day.
Yep.
Man, I want to talk to you a little bit about, like how you manage patience, making aggressive moves and stuff like that. Because last year, being my second year in Kansas, like I started feeling like I was starting to time things a little bit better. Where the first year I was there, my buddy Chad and I were there, and we had like a buck that was bedded that we put a stalk on, and we just tried to decoy him. We tried to rattle him. We were super close, and we thought he must have got out of that bed, and we just weren't patient enough. We got up and walked to see like where he was at. Well, we got within 40 yards of him. He jumped up. He was actually still in that bed, right? And so last year I started getting better at kind of being like spending more time on my glass, understanding what the deer were doing. And then whenever I was making a move, whenever I was aggressive, it was aggressive with patient intent, where I'd already put the time in. Now I can move and I know what I need to go do, but I was patient on the upfront. So can you talk to me a little bit about how you manage, when to go, when to lay back, when to watch, when to try to go in for a kill shot?
Yeah, so I wish that I could relay what goes through my head and show examples. I wish I could write a book on it, because I make mistakes and I don't have it all figured out. So don't get me wrong here, but I feel like it can be taught. It can be learned, I should say, to a point. But I feel like you go back to genetics, and you go back to either you have it or you don't type of thing. Like some people just have an instinct of understanding animals, animal behavior, knowing where they're going to go, knowing where they're going to be. Yeah, more time out in the field is going to make you way better. And I'm not saying that you can't learn this to a point, but I just feel like whenever you read a situation, say you have a buck pushing a doe into another little drainage or whatever the case may be, and then I can see a perfect drainage leading somewhat toward that area. I'm like, I look back at my buddy with the camera, I'm like, we got to go, and we got to go now. And there's times where you sprint, and there's times where, no, we got to sit here, because, I don't know what they're going to do once they go over that hill. I don't know what's over there. We just need to sit here and be patient. So there's no great answer for that, unfortunately. All I can say is just try to learn the terrain. The terrain features are probably the most learnable thing that you can take control of, is just understand the lay of the land, knowing where the deer might want to hang out, timing wise during the day. It's really hard for me to tell you the perfect answer to that question, because there's times where I'm sprinting, and there's times where I'm saying, no, we can't, it's too risky right now, we got to just wait.
Right. So. Yeah. I mean, I think for me, what helped me the most, that was a big difference in last year's trip, from the first year that I was there, because last year was probably the third year that I've dedicated like a fair amount of time to hunting on the ground. Because I took some trips to where, I even was hunting on the ground in PA in certain setups, and I was specifically looking for those setups where it's like, I know no one else is going to be here because there's no trees, and people around here want to hunt in trees. So if I can find a spot with no trees, deer are probably comfortable there. Probably going to have limited pressure, maybe no pressure in that area. And then there was the Missouri trip where I hunted on the ground a good bit, and then the 2 years in Kansas. And the thing that really started helping me was actually spending more time behind the glass early in the trip, watching, even if it wasn't a deer that I wanted to kill, just watching what the deer were doing. Like if it was a young buck, does, whatever, how they were using the particular area that I was looking at, and that started to help me understand where I could be aggressive, where I couldn't be aggressive, where I was going to have cover, where I wasn't going to have cover. To your point, there's areas where it's like I would see deer. I knew they couldn't see me, so I would just pay no mind and just buzz to wherever I was trying to get to. And there were other times where I knew, like, okay, I don't know if there's deer around here, but I know I'm going to be vulnerable here, so I need to pump the brakes and I need to be really observant before I start walking or anything,
Right.
Because that burned me in Iowa. I ended up bumping like a 180-inch deer out of a draw, and I was only probably 50 yards from him. But I didn't spend enough time on my glass to see that he was actually bedded 50 yards from where I was standing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I would have had a whole different game plan if I had known that. But that was literally the first time that I was ever ground hunting was that trip, Yeah. And so that was the biggest thing for me. It was just spending more time behind my glass, observing. That way when I'd have to make decisions, I can make them like quickly and kind of have an idea of what I need to do. Right.
Yeah, a couple things that come to mind, kind of examples of what I was saying earlier about knowing when to move. So a couple years ago, we had a herd of mule deer, and I know we're primarily talking about whitetails, but this is just a good example of knowing when to move. So we had a herd of mule deer. There was 2 bucks that were kind of pushing all the does around, and I noticed that throughout the morning, it was a couple hours time frame that we sat behind the glass watching all the herd. The bucks were pushing all the does around, scent checking, lip curling. When a doe would bed down, and she would get up later, they would run over to where she was laying so that they could sit check where she was at. So I noticed that. I noticed this one spot. The bucks just kept wanting to go back to this one doe's bedding area. She must have been pretty close to breeding because they were just really interested in that. Well, they had single file went over a hill away from that spot. And we were like probably 150 yards away from that spot. And I said to my buddy, as soon as that last deer crests the hill and they go over that hill out of sight, we are going to sprint to that where that doe is bedding. And we're going to hit those yucca plants right there. And we're going to just hit the ground, sit on the ground. I said, you need to get your arrow ready because I was filming, he was shooting. And I said, chances are there's going to be a buck that at some point circles back and scent checks that spot one more time. They just are so interested in it. And I am not kidding you. It was like 10 minutes from the time we sat down, and there was one. I mean, all you could see was antlers coming up over the hill, and I'm just like, oh my, this is working. So that was a perfect situation of just reading the animals, understanding the terrain. Whenever they go out of sight for just a split second, yeah, you're rolling the dice a little bit once in a while, but just make it happen, run, do it, try to get there, whatever. And then next scenario, and I'll hurry. So this year on my brother's mule deer hunt, there was like a big ridge coming down the middle, and then there was like two paths that were like waterways, drainages on either side. Up in the middle was a cornfield. On both sides were just kind of drainages, and we tried to decoy his buck in. It was a mule deer, so we had the mule deer doe. Tried to decoy this buck in, and he just, for some reason, he was on his own agenda. It doesn't work perfect every time, so he just decided, you know what, I'm good. I think I know where my girls are at, because he had separated earlier in the morning and was away from them, and he was kind of on a mission to find the doe group that he had left that morning. Well, he ended up taking the right fork, and so we really sprinted up the left fork and tried to get ahead of him and try to go over the top. Yes, we were kind of rolling the dice a little bit to kind of silhouette ourselves up top, but I knew that if we got ahead of him and if we were careful when we peeked over, then we might be ahead of him. Sure enough, we no more than crested the hill and started down on that other side where I thought he might be. He was actually coming up the hill to us in the middle, and we met face to face at like 60, 70 yards. And luckily, thank goodness, I was walking with that doe decoy ahead of me, in front of me. And so we were behind the decoy. My brother was behind me with the bow. I had the camera and the decoy. And if we wouldn't have been single file right there behind that decoy, and that's another good tip, is if you are using a decoy, to use that, like if you're peeking up over a hill or peeking up anywhere, having that up to cover your movement will get you kind of a lot of insurance, basically. Anyway, he came right up the hill at us, came right at the decoy. My brother shot him, and that was the end of the story. So anyway, just knowing when to sprint, knowing when to move, knowing knowing what terrain features are there and when you want to peek over and whatnot. So those are two good examples of kind of when and where to go.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, you brought up decoying, and I did want to talk to you about that because, I started using one in Kansas a little bit, and I had, not this past year, but the year before, I actually had a really good deer come in, and I should have moved it. I showed up in the dark, right? There was a new area that I wanted to go to. I was like, there was just like this creek bottom, and hadn't been in there before, and I just felt like it just, when you look at something on a map and you drive. I did a drive-by of it, and actually, as I was driving by the evening before, a great 10-point came out and was running alongside the truck, and I was like, all right, there's a good buck in here. Let me see if I can't go in here and work something up. So I went in the next morning in the dark, set up my decoy. I use a heads-up decoy as well, and while I'm set up there, I had a doe come. I was in a ghillie jacket, CRP. There was like some locust saplings that were sticking up, and there was like this creek bottom. And doe comes walking right behind me. I mean, I had her at like 5 yards just feeding behind me. Like I could hear her chewing. Like it was like I've never had so many close encounters as I've had in Kansas the past 2 years, and all of them on the ground where I just have like deer on top of me. It's mind blowing. And I was getting ready to move, and when I got ready to move, all of a sudden I just saw antlers coming through the timber, and so I couldn't move. And my decoy was out in front of me. And what I really wanted to do was there was a set of 3 cedars that were kind of making a triangle that were in this bottom. I wanted to get in between them, and I wanted to kind of move my decoy close to where I saw this scrape when I pulled the binos up. The scrape wasn't far away; it was only like 30 yards away, but I wanted to get on the other side of it. Well, he came in, saw the decoy. I snort wheezed at him. He put on a little bit of a show. Then he kind of turned and went behind this down log, and I was dropping milkweed, and I could see my thermals just dropping into this bottom. Supposed to have a 7-mile-per-hour wind that day. If I would have had any of that 7-mile-per-hour, I would have been clean. But with no wind at that moment, they were just dropping right to where he was going to want to walk. And he ended up busting me there. I got him at like 15 yards. I was at full draw, and just no shot happened. Right. But I felt like I didn't effectively use the decoy. I've used it to walk and stuff like that. I'm just curious, man, if someone has never decoyed before, how would you explain how to use decoys effectively? How do you use them effectively?
Yeah, so first of all, deer are expecting to hear other deer. They're used to deer movement. They're used to noise. They're used to deer approaching. If a mature buck's bedded down with a doe and he's got her locked down, they are expecting other bucks to come in to scent check that doe because she is hot. I mean, that's just nature. And so don't worry, especially when you have a decoy up in front of you. If it's a handheld decoy, which is what I recommend when you're moving, it's okay to make noise. So that's number one. Number two, try to envision pulling a deer out of his bedding area and try to have your best guess of what he's going to do when he stands up. Sometimes it's as simple as no matter where you're at and where you show him the decoy or get his attention or whatever it is, they are a lot of times just going to come straight at you because they're mad. They don't want you there. Their doe is right there. That's their doe, and they're going to protect it. And so sometimes it's very simple and they make the decision for you, and it's just pretty much easy. They come right at you. Sometimes they do a bigger circle, try to get a little better wind, especially if they're deer that may be questionable if they're dominant in the area. Maybe they're a 4-year-old buck who they have another 4-year-old buck who's very similar, and maybe they have to fight. Maybe they've gotten their butt whooped from another buck in the area. So we had that happen a couple times this year with whitetails where, they didn't act like mature bucks. And to me, that's a telltale right there. Like, whenever I have a question, do I want to shoot this deer or not? If a deer is extremely confident and he is taking no crap off anybody and he stomps in there like he is the boss, then he's probably the boss because they've been preparing for this for the last couple weeks, month, whatever it is. That's why they have scrapes. That's why they have social moments. That's why they spar. That's why they fight. And if they're confident, then you probably should take that animal if you like him. And so I guess when you're talking whitetails, I always use a buck because they're just more aggressive. I'm using their aggression, their behavior, their testosterone against them, and I'm taking advantage of that. I'm trying to, say there's one, maybe you have 20 minutes of daylight left, and maybe he got up out of his bed and he's working up this drainage because he's tried to scent check for that first doe coming into heat or whatever it is. I'm going to try to get somewhat in his path. Like if I have to back out and make a big loop and run all the way around and try to get, in the last 10 minutes of daylight, try to work in front of him, I'm going to do that with a decoy in my hand. When I get there, I'm going to grunt, snort, wheeze at him. And I'm going to try to get him to close that last little bit of distance so I can get an arrow in him before dark or whatever. Like I said, my favorite scenario is when I see something bed down, once the sun comes up and I feel like he's really good and settled for the day with his doe. Sometimes it takes till 11 in the morning because, it's cold out. They like moving. They like walking around. Maybe he's standing there tending his doe for the better part of the morning. Once they get good and settled down and he finally hits the ground and I feel like he's confident in his bedding area, then that's when I make my move, especially if I'm waiting for the wind to come up, get that little bit of wind, in my face or the sound to kind of help me out a little bit. So that's what I look for is, do I have wind? Do I have cover? Do I have shadows? Is he for sure bedded in a spot where I think he's going to stay? Are there any other deer around? Do I need to worry about bumping this doe on my way to him, which could take everybody out of there? So those are all things that I really look for.
Yeah, it's how often are you using? I know you mentioned, we talked about grunting just a little bit ago because you were like, sound like a deer, like you did the right thing. You were close, he couldn't see you, he heard you, so just pretend like you're a deer. How often are you using rattling? Because I've used it some out there, and I'll say I've had mixed results with rattling.
So I think rattling works whenever you happen to be in that small window where maybe a mature buck left a doe that he's already bred and he's looking for that next one. He may be thinking, okay, there's 2 bucks over here fighting for a hot doe. I don't have a doe anymore, and I'm going to go spoil the party and I'm going to take that doe. So it's a small window. Now, does it work? Absolutely. But I feel like a buck has to be without a hot doe. So it may be early in the year, like say Halloween time frame into October, early November, where he hasn't found that good hot doe that he's confident that he wants to be with. So I would say there are windows where it can work great. And I like using it for still hunting or ambush hunting whenever I feel like there's a buck in that pocket of timber and I don't feel confident enough that I can walk in there or crawl in there with a decoy and actually make something happen because, I may bust him out of there because he's laying within 50 yards and I can't see him. It's so thick, right? So that's when rattling antlers can really be to your benefit is you're maybe 100 yards away from that area and you want to back up and you don't want to be intrusive and you want to pull him out. So great there. But whenever I have a decoy, I rarely use rattling antlers because I'm usually going in and I'm going to get close enough that I can talk to them quietly with a grunt tube or a snort wheeze, and I don't need to make a lot of ruckus with rattling antlers. So just picking those times, like I said, if you can't see the animal and you don't want to go into thick cover, use the rattling antlers, try to get him to stand up, try to make something happen. I've caught a lot of bucks in with rattling horns, no doubt about it. But
that was most of the deer that I brought in was exactly what you were saying. They were coming in to see who has a doe and who's fighting over a doe. There's got to be a doe in here, and it was always a solo buck that was coming in. Most of the other encounters that I've had that were really good were actually ones where I was close enough that I could grunt or whatever the case was. You made a point there that was interesting, and this just goes back to like paying attention to the deer and what they're telling you, that you've talked about a lot during this session, was you said, pay attention to, like, do they come in with confidence? How do they respond whenever like they hear a grunt or a snort wheeze or whatever the case is that the dominant buck? So that big deer that I had the encounter with last year, the first time I saw him, I was crawling up the edge of this draw And I stopped behind this like grove of cedars, and I was like, I'm just going to stop here. I'm going to glass because I know deer like to use the head of this draw from the previous year. And I'm just going to see if I can find how they're moving. If I can pick a buck out, maybe I see one, maybe I don't, and I'm going to make my way to the head of this draw, but I'm going to take my time. And I'm sitting behind these cedars, and I just glance over to my right, and across the draw or across the drainage, here comes, he was like 130 inch, like 8-point roughly. And I was going to kill him because I was like, that's good deer for me. You know what I mean? Especially public land, doing it like in a couple days, trying to get it done. And I saw him. And so he got behind the cedars. I grunted. He stopped and he looked. He was like, oh, what's that? Then he kind of kept walking. He got behind the cedars. So then to your point, it's like I had some cover sound and I had the cedars between us. So I ran down behind the cedars to get toward the bottom of the draw to where if I needed to, I could shoot across the draw to kill him, or I'm going to try to bring him in. Right. So as he's coming closer, he wasn't quite coming to where I could shoot him. So I snort wheezed at him to try to get him ticked off to try to commit. Right, man, he about jumped out of his fur and like just took off. And so it was in that moment I was like, "There's a bigger deer in here." You know what I mean? I was like, and it wasn't 5 minutes later, Travis, that all of a sudden like I see a tail flick like 100 yards up ahead of me, and I was like, "Oh, some deer up there." So I throw the glass on him, and I was like, "Oh, there's 3 does up there." And then I just saw antlers come up above like the crest, like this little undulation that was in the that was in the ground. I was like, oh man, I was like, that's a big deer, and so that was how I ended up finding him. Right. It was because the little one or the younger deer, he's probably a 3-year-old, 130 inch 3-year-old. Yeah. He told me there was a bigger deer in the area. You know what I mean? Because it wasn't like I snort wheezed and he was like, hey, who is this? It was like I snort wheezed and he was like, I'm out of here. Right. So it was like he didn't even think about it. He was like, oh yeah, I'm gone. I'm not messing with this guy.
You found the satellite buck, and and he was confident until he wasn't confident. So
that's right.
We kind of had the same thing happen. Like I said, this year we had I'm going to say a 4-year-old 145 inch 10 come in, and he had a doe by himself, so he was old enough to have a lone doe and to have one pinned down, and he was a really beautiful tall tine basket rack buck, just amazing genetics. But anyway. He stood up and he came in and he would stop and he would just stand there all curled up and he would snort wheeze, but it would be almost quiet. Like he wanted to do it. He wanted to give it 100%, but he just couldn't. So like whenever there's that hesitation there, like that told me right there, like there is a older deer in this area and he's just not quite confident yet, And so, it's just, if you're out there and read all that stuff, it's amazing how much they tell you.
Yeah, 100%, man. That's the beauty of it, is if you just pay attention, then they will tell you, they will read the book to you, so to speak.
Right. Yeah.
But, well, man, I appreciate you doing this on a Sunday afternoon, buddy. I don't want to keep you here all Sunday. I know you got baseball practice to get to. I love the conversation, man. This gives me a lot to think about. I'm hoping to get back out. I don't know if I'll get back out there this year or not, but Kansas is. It has stolen my heart, if you will. So it's probably my favorite place to hunt right now. But before I let you get going, let folks that are listening know where they can find out more about you, where they can follow along with your hunts and things of that nature. Yeah,
well, I appreciate it. So first off, if you come out, give me a shout. I'll be glad to help you out if you need it. And if you want to continue the conversation, I know an hour and a half went by real quick. And if you want to have more chats later on down the road, I'm always willing to do it. I love talking about this stuff. It flew by.
For sure, man.
Anyway, so if you want to find me on Instagram, it's just Travis_Glassman. And then on YouTube, if you just search my name, Travis Glassman, it'll come right up. You can check out the videos, a lot of fun stuff, a lot of intense ground hunting. There's an awesome Wyoming elk hunt last year that I just filmed. Brother was with me and he filmed it for me. So anything we do, we love filming. So if you want to follow along, that would be awesome.
Awesome, man. Well, I appreciate it. Everyone should go check out the videos. You have yourself a good Sunday and good luck at baseball practice. And if you need any wrestling stuff, let me know, man.
All right. Appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, folks, that is a wrap for today's show. I'd like to thank all of you for listening, and if you haven't yet, please head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast. And hell, while you're at it, head over to YouTube and give us a sub there too. I'd be super appreciative if you do those few things for me. Before I shut this thing down, I need to give a big shout out to the partners who continue to help us make this podcast possible. Spartan Forge, Tethered, Exodus Outdoor Gear, and Genesee Beer. And until next time, we'll see y'all.